The fateful flight's takeoff. An American night unfolds. Los Angeles International Airport hardly ever sleeps. But a certain late spring night stood out with an unusual quiet, as if the air itself sensed something momentous was about to unfold. Under the shimmering glow of floodlights and the distant rumble of jet engines, Boeing 777 flight AA370 awaited its departure at Gate 54A. The clean white and blue fuselage, gleaming from the last pre-flight inspection, was a testament to American engineering, the pride of both the airline and the country. Inside the plane, the crew prepared with a ritualistic precision. Captain George Walker, a man with silver-streaked hair and a calm, authoritative voice, methodically reviewed the flight plan one last time. Walker was no stranger to the long haul. With more than 20,000 flight hours logged and a career that began back with twin-engine Beechcrafts in rural Montana, he embodied the professionalism any passenger would trust. Across the aisle, First Officer Daniel Thompson, sporting the fresh enthusiasm of youth and a perfectly pressed uniform, tapped through the latest checklist updates on his tablet. Daniel was in the final stage of his captaincy training. After tonight, full certification would await him, if only this cross-country journey went without a hitch. The cabin bustled discreetly with last preparations. Flight attendants, uniforms crisp and welcoming, ensured that the 237 passengers, Americans but also Canadian, British, Brazilian, Japanese and others, were seated, buckled and reassured for the long overnight haul to New York. Bags thudded gently into overhead bins, the intercom echoed with announcements, and business travelers typed last-minute emails while children pressed their faces to the oval windows, entranced by the sea of airport lights outside. As the control tower radio buzzed to life, Walker responded with cool confidence. "LAX Tower, this is American 370. Read you loud and clear. Ready for pushback." In the cockpit, final systems checks flickered green across the panels. Avionics, navigation, comms, pressurization, hydraulics, the exhaustive pre-flight ballet that kept American aviation an icon of safety. Co-pilot Daniel called out the checklist while George monitored engine readouts and windshield visibility. Each step was practiced, yet never routine. In the silence that settled after cabin crew prepare for takeoff, the plane was cleared to leave the gate. Pushback began exactly at 11:27 p.m. Engines whined, growing to a sonorous roar as the Boeing 777 rolled from the stand. The weight of responsibility, the lives aboard, a journey stretching over a continent, weather systems forming over the plains, was, as always, quietly colossal. Taxiing to runway 25R, runway lights guiding the aircraft like glowing breadcrumbs, AA370 joined a line of departures, each jet a story in the making. George reflected on routes flown before, the trusted routine of LA-New York, the remarkable predictability that made American air travel a marvel of modern life. But even as George and Daniel shared a knowing glance, silently reassuring each other with professional camaraderie, no one, on board or on the ground, could have anticipated that tonight, every procedure, every handshake, and every hopeful "have a good flight" would be shadowed by a mystery about to grip a nation. Smooth early operations. The ascent into the night sky was as seamless as a classic American cross-country drive, an orchestration of experience and coordinated technology. As soon as the wheels of AA370 left the runway, the massive aircraft climbed steadily and confidently, slicing through the blanket of clouds that hung over the California coastline. From the cockpit, Captain Walker and First Officer Thompson maintained a steady exchange, monitoring the smooth climb rate, double-checking the scheduled waypoints and maintaining routine communication with air traffic control. "Climb and maintain 35,000 feet, the voice from Los Angeles Center came over the radio. "American 370, Roger, climbing to 350, Captain Walker responded, his voice steady and matter-of-fact. The altimeters climbed, fuel systems purred, and the sophisticated navigation suite plotted a precise course toward the Midwest. In the passenger cabin, everything echoed that sense of practiced calm. Flight attendants rolled beverage carts down the aisles, gently waking a few drowsy travelers while the more eager guests pulled out books, tablets, or headphones to settle in for the long haul. Business class passengers unfolded their seats, stretching out while sipping sparkling water or scotch. In economy, some passengers already had their eyes closed, the city lights below twinkling like faraway dreams. Just outside Chicago, the Boeing's giant General Electric engines hummed so reliably that a sense of invincibility seemed to settle over the cabin. Flight attendants quietly checked all systems, lavatories, galley equipment, and emergency supplies. Far below, the tapestry of city grids and the rolling darkness of the American heartland became a moving mural beneath the wings. For many passengers, some on their way to family reunions, others returning from international business or embarking on new adventures, there was a contented sense that, for tonight, everything was truly under control. Back up front, the crew exchanged routine position reports with air traffic control centers as they passed from western into central U.S. airspace. Every checkbox ticked, every system in the green, and even turbulence remained nothing more than a gentle ripple. Coffee brewed in the galley, one flight attendant quietly sang a Motown tune while prepping the midnight snack service. The mood was an unremarkable blend of professionalism and benign monotony, exactly the kind of routine that makes modern air travel such a marvel. Subdued lighting washed across the cabin, accentuating the navy blue seats and faintly illuminating the quiet anticipation on every face. No one, it seemed, not the crew nor the passengers, had the faintest inkling that this ordinary night above America's heartland could soon be etched in aviation history forever. Routine communication with air traffic control. It was now midnight, the city lights far behind as flight AA370 glided at cruising altitude, slicing through the upper atmosphere with mechanical grace. The cockpit was a haven of quiet concentration, bathed in the soft glow of illuminated panels. The radio crackled occasionally with the gentle, practiced exchanges that are the lifeblood of commercial flight. American 370, maintain flight level 350, came the calm voice of Kansas City Center. American 370, Roger, holding at 350, Captain Walker responded. His tone was businesslike but held a trace of the grounded confidence that defined a seasoned aviator. Each scheduled report was executed perfectly, waypoint after waypoint ticked by with Walker updating their position and status. First Officer Thompson alternated between handling the radio and verifying the checklists, their teamwork nearly telepathic after hours spent in the flight simulator together. Backup systems were green, weather was reported calm all the way to the East Coast, and routine notifications about position, speed, and altitude continued to stream back to ground control. Even as the miles rolled by in the dark sky high above the Midwest, everything felt predictably normal, eerily so. The common banter between pilots and controllers, filled with airline call signs and altitude confirmations, underscored the routine nature of the crossing. Meanwhile, the air traffic controllers in windowed towers scanning their radar screens marked AA370's progress with barely a second thought. It was one of dozens crossing the continent that night, its blip a steady reassurance in the electronic dance of the airways. Technology stood guard as well. Every several minutes, the secondary surveillance radar interrogated the aircraft's transponder, receiving instant responses. ACARS, Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, automatically relayed engine status and flight data. If any deviation occurred, alarms on the ground would alert both airline operations and controllers instantly. Nothing suggested a problem. On both land and in the sky, the fabric of communication, so often taken for granted, was holding strong. The nightside controllers drinking their coffee could hardly imagine anything but an uneventful run. Fuel reserves were optimal, navigation aids cross-checked, and the pilots maintained contact through both the main and backup radios. In the rarefied pressurized air of the cockpit, Walker and Thompson exchanged a few quiet words about home, sports, and families, never drifting far from their professional duties. No one on either end of the radio, neither in the skies above the Mississippi River nor sitting at panels in Kansas City or Indianapolis, could foresee that the sequence of calm exchanges and quiet routines would soon shatter, leaving an imprint on aviation history and on the lives of everyone connected to American 370. An unexpected turn above the American sky. At precisely 1:19 a.m., as the Boeing 777 glided smoothly into the edge of Montana's federal airspace, an eerie calm settled over the cockpit. Captain George Walker, having just exchanged the standard pleasantries with California Air Traffic Control, "Have a safe night," felt for a brief moment that all was right in the world above the clouds. Unbeknownst to anyone on board or on the ground, this would become the final verified contact from Flight AA370. Until this minute, nothing separated this flight from thousands of routine transcontinental crossings. The night sky was smooth, instruments hummed their reassuring chorus, and passengers and crew alike embraced the monotony and safety of modern aviation. For the families on the East Coast waiting for loved ones, the minute hand crept toward sunrise, anticipation building for reunions and business as usual. Then, in the seconds following the captain's last transmission, silence swept over the open frequencies. Air traffic controllers, accustomed to the near-constant crackle of pilot check-ins as craft passed from one flight region to the next, waited for the standard handoff to Denver Center. It never came. The unbroken silence, at first brushed off as technical delay, quickly began to feel ominous. California tried to reach out once, then twice. Denver checked their screens. No response. In the cockpit, the exact sequence will never be fully known. Was there a flicker of worry at a warning light? Did the crew sense a deviation or simply carry on into the void? The crew's professionalism would not have allowed panic, but the sudden collapse of communication marked a boundary between ordinary flight and the threshold of enigma. What makes this moment so chilling was its utter predictability. No alarms tripped, no flight path deviation, not even turbulence to hint at the storm brewing just seconds ahead. And yet, with no distress call, no squawk code, and no explanation, AA370 faded from vocal reach as completely as if the night sky itself had swallowed the plane whole. Radar operators in far-off Midwest towers leaned forward into their monitors. FAA officials phoned their counterparts. Airline dispatchers double-checked maintenance logs, passenger lists, anything that could explain the abrupt break. The digital silence, seemingly impossible, stretched, minute by minute, until what began as a routine crossing was on its way to becoming one of the most perplexing aviation events in American memory. Disappearance from radar. At exactly 1:21 a.m., the calm and order that had governed AA370's journey dissolved in an instant, though no one on board was aware of it at the time. High above the American Midwest, the Boeing 777 had just left behind one control sector and was moments away from establishing radio contact with the next. This progression, seamless on any normal night, concealed an event that would become one of the most scrutinized mysteries in American aviation history. Inside radar control rooms in Denver and Kansas City, the graveyard shift controllers kept their eyes on broad screens, a jigsaw of green echoes, identification codes, and slowly crawling flight numbers. AA370, like all commercial jets, had not only its radio transponder continuously emitting a unique identification code, known as a squawk, but also an array of systems sending regular updates on position, altitude, and heading both by active radar interrogation and by digital data link. For decades, this mesh of surveillance ensured that losing track of a jet was virtually unheard of outside of the most remote stretches of the globe. That's why, when AA370's return signal abruptly flickered and then vanished from the primary and secondary radar displays simultaneously, a ripple of confusion moved through the control center. At first, the loss seemed like a short-lived blip, perhaps due to signal interference, a transponder reset, or some other transient technical anomaly. Such blips did occur, usually resolving themselves within moments as the aircraft crossed overlapping radar coverage. But this instance was chillingly different. For the technical operators, the disappearance was confirmed by the ominous silence from the ACARS and ADS-B automatic reporting systems that provided digital snapshots of the airplane's parameters. The systems designed to act as redundant safety nets, failures of one routinely compensated by another, now presented a total blackout. The electronic hum of the radar room seemed to grow louder as controllers instinctively leaned forward, scanning for the telltale return. Flights above, below, and beside AA370 continued to ping normally. Only this flight had gone dark. There was no descent, no course deviation apparent, no distress call, not even a basic mayday or coded emergency squawk. The rigid workflow in such situations dictated an immediate attempt at re-establishing contact. Repeated radio calls were made on the standard frequencies, each one growing subtly more urgent in tone. American 370, this is Denver Center, radio check, do you read? The only reply was static. Messages went out to other aircraft in the vicinity. Had anyone seen or heard from the missing jet? Fellow pilots, professionals used to camaraderie and shared risks, responded that their visual and radio contact had been perfectly normal before AA370 faded into invisibility. Simultaneously, backup protocols swung into action. The nearby air traffic control centers checked their own screens and logs, hoping perhaps for a technical miscommunication or for the flight to reappear at the edge of another radar sweep. The Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, technical staff began reviewing the data relays, scanning for evidence of a system-wide glitch. Airline operations at American headquarters were alerted, triggering internal checklists meant for just these rarest of cases. They tried satellite calls, desperate for any ping from the aircraft's onboard communications addressing and reporting system. But nothing came back. As the minutes ticked by, reality began to set in. AA370, a state-of-the-art Boeing 777 with the best in redundant communications, was now a ghost in American airspace. The controllers, sworn to air safety and clinging to hope, kept up their attempts well beyond protocol. The flight path was replayed over and over. The aircraft had been holding a steady 35,000 feet, reporting no trouble. The weather and traffic around it were benign. There was simply no precedent for an airplane of this scale vanishing so cleanly, so completely, without warning. In that first tense half hour, centers up and down the mid-continent corridor collaborated, each confirming with the next that they had neither seen nor heard a trace of AA370 since the last verified contact. Automated flight following systems painted a clear cutoff. At precisely 1:21 a.m., electronic signals simply stopped. The radar track terminated mid-air, handover procedures never finished, not a single squawk coming from the jet. This unprecedented silence triggered the next stage of crisis. The emergency missing aircraft checklist came into play, a rarity, typically confined to drills. Supervisors notified the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, the FAA's Crisis Response Unit, and the U.S. Air Force's Rescue Coordination Center. Within minutes, word began to spread. Airline dispatchers scoured their own telemetry feeds. Nothing had been received since the blackout. The media was still in the dark, but the first flurry of internal alerts echoed out. Every institution in modern U.S. aviation now on notice that something extraordinary had happened on a routine cross-country flight. In the passenger cabins of other flights, those still under the watchful eye of radar and control, none suspected the drama unfolding thousands of feet above. In private, a few senior controllers exchanged murmurs wondering about catastrophic failure scenarios, a power loss, a sabotage of onboard electronics, or an event so sudden there had been no chance for the crew to react. Yet there were no indications, no clues, nothing except that vast unblinking blank on the radar screens. For all of aviation's technological prowess, the world had just experienced a modern-day vanishing act. The shock was only just beginning. It's almost impossible to overstate the unease that settled across the national airspace infrastructure that night. Losing an aircraft wasn't simply about a blip on a screen. It meant 239 souls. It threatened the bedrock confidence in how America watched its skies, and it forced officials to post tense, cautious alerts to airports along the East Coast. Be on the lookout for any sign of AA370. Military installations joined in, scanning their more powerful search radars, but with civil systems reporting total silence, hope began to fade for an immediate reappearance. Outside, the black Midwest fields below were as featureless as an inkwell, concealing any evidence. Air National Guard pilots were called in for a rare potential intercept, their orders to search the night sky for anything out of the ordinary. As dawn approached, the vanished jet was fast becoming the top story in every command center, and soon, the entire nation would awaken to the disturbing headlines: how in the heart of America a sophisticated passenger jet could simply disappear. The strange journey across military radar. For hours after American Flight 370 vanished from civilian radar, the nation's air traffic system continued its desperate search for answers. Yet, while the bright screens in control towers and airline command centers descended into an anxious standstill, another network of watchful eyes in the vastness of the western United States began picking up puzzle pieces that would deepen the mystery. High on the plains of Wyoming, inside a fortified NORAD bunker, military operators monitored their more sophisticated long-range and highly sensitive surveillance radar. Unlike the civilian system, which relies not only on radar echoes but also on automatic transmissions from the aircraft's own transponder, these military arrays could spot even non-cooperative targets, capable of reaching deep into the atmosphere to catch fleeting traces of movement against the black backdrop of night. The timeline was already burned into everyone's mind. 1:21 a.m., silence from AA370, the point of disappearance from all civilian systems, flashing red on every coordination bulletin. Within 10 minutes, military controllers were quietly instructed, first by the Federal Aviation Administration and, soon after, directly from Pentagon staff, to run focus sweeps for unidentified aircraft in the Central Air Corridor. Initial results were both expected and unfathomable. In the barrenness above rural Wyoming, radar screens identified a sizable return, an object matching both the speed and profile of a large commercial airliner, traveling at roughly 35,000 feet. Operators, careful not to jump to conclusions, checked signatures, cross-referenced with known military flights, and waited for the signal to appear on the commercial feeds. But there was nothing. The civilian radar, operating in perfect parallel, was utterly blind. This was not just a missing airplane. It was a moving ghost only visible to those peering behind the official curtain. As the minutes ticked by, the radar trace did something extraordinary and deeply unsettling. It broke its eastbound course and executed a sharp, almost improbable leftward turn to the south, an angle so abrupt it would have sent unsecured objects sliding and startled any experienced pilot. The path then looped back, turning again northeast, so sharply and at such speeds that the aircraft's flight profile briefly exceeded every typical commercial standard. The altitude, too, vacillated wildly, one moment spiking to a shocking 58,000 feet, beyond even the operating ceiling of a Boeing 777, and the next plunging rapidly down to less than 5,000 feet above the rolling high plains. For military radar operators, the pattern was as bizarre as it was alarming, a phantom flight rebelling against all expectation. The command center's phones rang off the hook as analysts gathered, squinting over their displays and calling up historical precedents. Could extreme turbulence or a catastrophic technical failure have caused such a wild signature, or was someone or something deliberately guiding the aircraft through this chaotic ballet? Protocol dictated that any unidentified aircraft displaying such threatening or erratic behavior must be treated as a possible security threat. Orders went swiftly up the chain, and NORAD dispatched 2 F-16 interceptors from a nearby airbase. Their mission: make visual contact, verify the target's identity, and be prepared for any eventuality. The interceptors thundered into the night, radio communications crisp and urgent. As the jets approached the projected track, the fleeting blip of AA370 reappeared on their screens, pulsing in and out of existence just south of the North Dakota border. The pilots scanned the endless darkness below, their onboard radars painting and repainting a ghost signal that seemed to be always just out of eyesight, slipping between cloud banks or perhaps hidden against the ambient noise of the environment. No running lights were visible, no beacon. Within moments, after one last wild jolt, the signal vanished just as abruptly as it had reappeared, dissolving into the electronic ether. There was nothing to see, nothing to photograph, only the certainty that something massive had been there and was now gone. Back in the military operations room, the silence deepened with a new kind of dread. The data was rerun, triple-checked, and plotted against every conceivable flight plan or known deviation. Comparisons were made with atmospheric disturbances, secret military flights, electronic jamming exercises, even meteor showers, anything that might generate a false positive. But the raw radar returns showed a clear physical object maneuvering at velocities, headings, and altitudes that defied mundane explanations. By dawn, intelligence officers and FAA liaisons worked in hushed clusters, preparing briefing packets for the highest levels of government and aviation security. The news that an airliner, presumed missing and feared lost, had briefly re-emerged on secret defense screens would not be shared with the public, not yet. What if panic took hold? What if terrorist groups or foreign intelligence caught wind of a mysterious blip zigzagging across secure U.S. airspace? The stakes, it seemed, had grown even higher than the fate of one doomed flight. Inside the White House Situation Room and at the Pentagon, deliberations grew tense. Should the military attempt a broader search using AWACS aircraft with the world's most advanced moving target indicator radars? Could satellite imagery, scrambled for civilian airliners only under the direst circumstances, reveal anything about an aircraft apparently operating in a shadow zone between conventional airspace and the invisible periphery of defense networks? Meanwhile, controllers in regional airbases and FAA centers quietly reviewed every unrelated air incident for hints. A pilot reporting strange turbulence, a rancher hearing unexplained jet noise in the Wyoming night, atmospheric anomalies picked up by weather satellites. Each microclue was run through a secure national database, cross-referenced against the timeline of Flight 370's last known and suspected positions. Nothing fully matched. There was only that brief, almost taunting glimpse, a huge aircraft on an impossible path, ricocheting through the vastness, immune to the systems built to keep the nation's skies safe and explainable. For those in military intelligence and aviation safety, this episode changed their entire paradigm. the robust confidence that layer upon layer of radars, transponders, and digital check-ins could prevent anything from going missing in American airspace began to erode. Would future incidents require new protocols, perhaps even changes in international law governing the tracking of civilian aircraft? Was this a fluke, or a warning sign of vulnerabilities no one had considered? In the weeks that followed, analysts pored over terabytes of radar data, reconstructing in three-dimensional visualizations the mad spiral of AA370 after it left the familiar surveillance net. Experts were called from NASA and DARPA. In closed rooms, hypotheses were debated. Could such an aircraft, even with its vast electronic toolkit disabled, truly fly off the grid, using only celestial navigation, visual cues, or preloaded terrain maps? If so, why? And who was on board, controlling each shuddering turn? The military episode never made it to the evening news. To the public and the waiting families, AA370 had vanished somewhere over the middle of the country without a trace. But deep within the defense establishment, the memory of that one wild trace remained, a silent warning about the limits of even the most advanced eyes on the American sky. For the men and women in those bunkers and command rooms, every rotation of the radar dish became a challenge to fate. Never again let the air above the heartland host such a mystery. But for the briefest hours in the dark Wyoming night, the American imagination itself was forced to confront the unthinkable. A machine so colossal and so closely watched could still, with terrifying unpredictability, become a flying enigma. Communication technology and the zones of ambiguity. The modern marvel of transcontinental flight rests squarely atop a web of complex communications technologies, systems that ensure a passenger jet's location, intentions, and status are always known by someone, somewhere. For an aircraft such as AA370, flying over the heart of North America, this network is not only expected but demanded. Radar sweeps, transponders, digital data links, satellite pings, HF radio, and fail-safe redundancies, all designed to make literal disappearance impossible, or so it seemed before that fateful night. Unlike the days when pilots relied entirely on voice radio and ground beacons, today's jets are embedded in a real-time matrix of communication. The aircraft broadcasts its position every few seconds through its transponder, squawking a 4-digit code unique to each plane, readable by civilian and military radars alike. In parallel, systems like ACARS, Aircraft Communications Addressing and Reporting System, quietly transmit status updates, engine performance, and operational data over VHF or satellite links to airline dispatchers and ground controllers. ADS-B, Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast, adds another digital heartbeat, painting a near-live silhouette of a plane's every move for anyone listening in with the right gear. Even when crossing remote stretches without ground radar coverage, satellite-based communications step in, linking cockpit and command center via geostationary relays many miles overhead. Yet, in the vanishing of AA370, this patchwork of oversight was found to have seams. Investigators would later scrutinize not just the technology itself, but its underlying philosophy. What happens when the very tools meant to ensure transparency are circumvented, sabotaged, or hit by a convergence of unlikely failures? It began with the transponder. In normal flight, this small but vital instrument constantly emits electronic identification, allowing controllers to follow the aircraft seamlessly as responsibility is handed from sector to sector. On most commercial jets, turning off the transponder isn't something that happens by accident. It requires deliberate action, or in rare cases, catastrophic electrical failure. The moment AA370's code vanished from secondary radar, a critical link was severed. FAA experts would later debate for months whether the unit failed on its own or was purposely shut off to erase the jet's digital presence. But redundancy is the rule in modern aviation. ACARS should have filled the void, continuing to send maintenance pings and status checks. Yet as investigators traced the data stream, they found that scheduled ACARS transmissions from AA370 abruptly stopped within moments of the lost radar contact. Some wondered if a skilled intruder in the cockpit, or a sophisticated cyber attack, could have deactivated these systems nearly simultaneously. Others suspected an internal malfunction knocked out interconnected communications. Satellite tracking was meant to provide a last resort, but here too, the radio silence was almost total. Only faint automated handshake signals, often hours apart, skirted the fringes of the satellite log, far too sparse to trace a precise flight path. The black box recorders, CVR, cockpit voice recorder, and FDR, flight data recorder, are designed to capture everything, even in the event of a catastrophic accident. These units broadcast underwater locator beacon signals and are engineered to survive fire, impact, and immersion. However, their recovery relies on knowing where the aircraft went down, or at least where its transmission ceased. In the case of AA370, when the airplane vanished from all normal tracking and its recorders fell silent, the search grid expanded from a focused corridor to a realm of speculation stretching hundreds of miles across sky and sea. For days, analysts scoured every potential technological handhold. Engineers modeled scenarios involving total electrical loss. Could a Boeing 777 go completely dark without warning? They simulated cascading systems failures. If one power bus were lost, how might backup batteries and generators react? The consensus was unsettling. Multiple independent communication pathways failed within moments, an occurrence statistically so improbable that deliberate intervention or an exceptionally rare confluence of technical faults became all but certain. The mysteries deepened with forensic traces left behind. Satellite companies pored over metadata in desperate search of pattern. Faint pings from the plane's onboard satellite data link were recorded for several hours after loss of active communications, suggesting some basic systems still functioned even as all deliberate messages ceased. These handshakes gave hope, if only as breadcrumbs, that AA370 had not suffered an immediate catastrophic breakup, but continued flying, perhaps on autopilot, across the vast unmonitored spaces where radar and radio overlap fades, and only the silent gaze of satellites remains. And so the zones of ambiguity became central to the investigation. In these nether regions between communication, technology fails to resolve exact location, heading, or even altitude. Analysts likened it to watching shadows flicker on an ancient wall. You can infer motion, maybe speed or intent, but never certainty. In hindsight, protocols were found wanting, not for lack of intent but due to patchwork gaps between systems, manufacturers, and nations' regulatory bodies responsible for integrating digital airspace. In the months and years after AA370, the international aviation community would confront the hard truth exposed by this tragedy. There were still places, even above the world's most developed nations, where a modern airliner could slip past every technological eye if the cascade was timed just so. Proposals rose for new standards: continuous streaming of black box data via satellite, tamper-proof recorders, multi-layered backups that cannot be disabled from on board. Passengers and flight professionals alike had to reevaluate their confidence in the skies. The shadow cast by communication failures, both technical and human, forced a reckoning in the very protocols that claimed absolute safety. With the best of modern technology, sometimes unable to prevent an aircraft from vanishing into uncertainty, one chilling fact became clear. Even in an age of infinite connectivity, the possibility of a plane disappearing into silence remains, a reality for which the world was at last painfully prepared to search. The desperate search and first discoveries. As the sun rose over the eastern seaboard, hope and dread mingled in command centers, newsrooms, and family kitchens across America. The aviation world had entered uncharted territory. A technologically advanced passenger jet had vanished without a trace over the heart of North America. Within hours, authorities mobilized the full spectrum of search and rescue operations, drawing on resources from the Federal Aviation Administration, the Coast Guard, military branches, civil aviation volunteer organizations, and even private satellite firms. The first challenge was the sheer size of the potential search area, with the last known radar trace dissipating somewhere above the rural Midwest, and faint satellite handshakes suggesting the plane might have veered far off its intended course. Planners were forced to consider a zone stretching for hundreds, if not thousands, of square miles, including stretches of open plains, river systems, mountain ranges, and eventually, the storm-tossed North Atlantic. Command posts sprang to life in Denver and Washington, D.C., coordinating with field offices in states like Wyoming, Montana, and both Dakotas. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, convened emergency task forces, while military aircrews received standby orders for wide-area reconnaissance missions. Within the first 24 hours, fleets of helicopters combed overland routes while fixed-wing aircraft equipped with advanced imaging radar fanned out along likely flight paths. The Air National Guard deployed aerial tankers, surveillance planes, and in some cases, ground vehicles to check isolated sites flagged by irregular satellite returns. Meanwhile, the U.S. Coast Guard and Navy prepared to monitor broad swaths of coastline, bracing for the possibility that the jet had somehow reached the Atlantic. Air traffic control rescanned hours of tapes. Every local airport and private airstrip received urgent requests for any sight of an unidentified jet. In the air, civilian pilots kept watch for metal glints or patterned fields of debris. No sign emerged in those frantic early days. Not a seat cushion, no oil slick, not even the shimmer of an aircraft window reflecting sunrise. Searchers found only open sky, rolling prairie, the vast empty silence that mocked the millions invested in aviation safety. American and international news outlets began the relentless cycle of updates, live maps, emotional interviews, and speculation. Candlelight vigils formed in communities from Los Angeles to New York. On social media, pilots, engineers, and amateur sleuths circulated theories, charts, satellite imagery, and, inevitably, rumors of everything from hijacking to paranormal activity. Under the surface, the technical investigation surged forward. Advanced synthetic aperture radar, SAR, sweeps from satellites scanned miles of countryside for signs of metallic wreckage. Remote sensing analysts at NASA and NOAA compared infrared imagery for changes in soil temperature or heat signatures. The FBI and Department of Homeland Security cross-referenced all registered commercial and military flights, double-checking the impossible. Had AA370 somehow landed somewhere or been concealed from immediate detection? Data from cell towers, Wi-Fi pings, meteorological and seismic sensors all fed into the growing digital tapestry of the search. Yet, for all the fervent effort, days blurred into weeks with no hard evidence. Searchers encountered false alarms, scrap metal long buried in fields, the shell of a downed crop duster, even a brightly painted ambulance abandoned on a remote highway. Each was investigated as if it might be the breakthrough the world awaited. The resolve of responders shifted between grim stoicism and weariness. At times hope pierced the monotony as new satellite imagery promised revelations, only to be dashed by technical ambiguities or inconclusive results. Finally, months after the disappearance, when speculation and fatigue threatened to bury the case, a faint thread of hope materialized in a most unexpected form. Off a small, wind-battered fishing village in the Bahamas, local boaters found a strange, barnacle-encrusted piece of aircraft debris washed ashore. The metallic relic was a portion of a wing flap battered by salt and sun but unmistakably stamped with a partial serial number. Within days, forensic engineers at the NTSB confirmed its origin was none other than American Airlines Flight 370, ending months of agonized uncertainty with a clue but not a conclusion. The reaction to this discovery was as complex as the case itself. For the families it was a devastating blow and a glimmer of closure tangled together. For the search teams and investigators, the location of the debris, so far from the predicted impact zones, upended entire models of the flight's suspected last moments. More search operations zeroed in on the North Atlantic currents, chasing satellites' drift patterns and oceanographers' maps in the hope of reconstructing the likely path of other floating remnants. Every new shard, no matter how small, offered a fragmentary window into the fate of that vanished night. But even as the world took stock of these grim finds, the sheer scale of the sea, sky, and scattered coasts rendered their victory incomplete. The main wreckage, the black boxes, the answers that haunted every department and every grieving loved one, still lay hidden, somewhere beyond the horizon or on the cold ocean floor. The search would become one of the most extensive and expensive in modern aviation history, ultimately outlasting public attention and driving lasting changes in how international flights would be monitored, tracked, and searched for generations to come. Lengthy theories and enduring mysteries. In the wake of the baffling disappearance of Flight AA370 over American skies, a torrent of theories emerged, each one attempting to account for the inexplicable loss of a modern jetliner in an age of pervasive technology and oversight. As weeks stretched into months and then years, public and private investigations delved into every conceivable scenario. Yet definitive answers remained elusive, fueling even more speculation and fascination that crossed global boundaries. Almost immediately, the most obvious suspect was catastrophic technical failure. Could a hidden flaw in the Boeing 777 have caused a sudden loss of power, structural integrity, or pressurization, rendering the crew and passengers powerless? Both government agencies and independent experts pored over maintenance records, analogs to similar incidents, and simulator recreations. Yet nothing in the aircraft's history suggested a ticking time bomb, nor did the patterns of earlier flights reveal any penchant for troublelets. The machine, by all measures, should have completed its journey without issue. This vacuum of proof opened the floor to less conventional explanations. Cyber attack was proposed by some, leveraging the timing of simultaneous communications failure. Aviation security forums endlessly debated the possibility that sophisticated malware or remote hacking could cripple the redundant digital nerve centers of a 777 mid-flight. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security worked closely with international cybercrime units to analyze every byte of data, tracing traffic from the aircraft's open communication ports, looking for unauthorized pings or code signatures. The results, much to the frustration of the technical community, came up blank. Still, in a post-9/11 landscape, the shadow of intentional interference refused to dissipate entirely. Terrorism and hijacking theories gained momentum as investigators pieced together the carefully cross-checked passenger manifest. The discovery that 2 travelers had boarded under stolen passports became a headline flashpoint, igniting suspicions that AA370 could have fallen victim to a hijacking. Law enforcement agencies from across the globe scrambled to track the origins of the passports, interview relatives, and scrutinize threads of criminal and extremist associations. However, further digging revealed the 2 individuals were refugees fleeing unstable regions, with no discernible connections to organized crime or terrorism. Their tragic inclusion only deepened rather than clarified the mystery. Psychological and behavioral analyses turned inward, focusing on the crew. Captain George Walker, hailed in media retrospectives as the consummate professional, underwent relentless posthumous scrutiny. Was there financial or emotional distress behind his calm facade? Did the co-pilot, so often the focus in aviation disappearances, display any instability? Investigators reviewed emails, bank records, therapy appointments, and social networks, always seeking that elusive hint of premeditated sabotage or breakdown. Nothing significant surfaced. Both men fit the profile of trusted aviators, admired by their peers and loved by their families. The theory that one or both would deliberately doom their own flight faced a mountain of contrary evidence. As the probe broadened, mechanical failure hypotheses competed with increasingly exotic notions: a rapid, undetectable decompression rendering the cabin unconscious, a mid-air collision with a drone or classified military aircraft, even electromagnetic phenomena that could disrupt navigation and communication electronics. Satellite experts parsed minute anomalies in signal drift and arcane datasets, hoping for a clue as to the jet's final heading. Oceanographers traced irrefutably authentic debris to improbable endpoints, challenging all pre-existing models of atmospheric and oceanic drift. Each new lead seemed to sprout fresh uncertainties. Network news segments and late-night talk shows devoted endless airtime to the story. Crime authors and documentary producers reconstructed the last hours down to the second, employing forensic actors and digital recreations. Internet forums theorized in real time, often spinning plausible leads into barely believable conjecture: a secret landing on a darkened runway in South America, abduction orchestrated by shadowy state actors, wormholes, or a mass delusion among air traffic controllers. No premise was too far-fetched for consideration. What set the AA370 case apart, however, was not just the absence of answers, but the way each plausible theory collapsed under its own weight. Every expert, from aeronautical engineers to investigative journalists, confronted technical, procedural, or psychological limitations in their stories. There was no smoking gun, no clear-cut criminal, no unequivocal act of God. The more analysts learned, the sharper the mystery grew. In time, the persistence of the unknown became its own legacy. Theories took on mythic status, invoked in policy discussions about international aviation standards, cybersecurity systems, cockpit security, and passenger vetting. Conspiracy and truth intertwined, changing the way the public weighed the risks of air travel. The families of the lost were left with only grief and questions that no authority could answer, their search for closure never quite matching the relentless churn of official investigation. Each anniversary of the disappearance rekindled speculation. Anonymous tips, new radar plots, alleged sightings, and purported insiders surfaced like clockwork. But the central questions, what really happened, and who or what was truly responsible, remained beyond the power of authorities, scientists, and storytellers. With enough time and distance, the saga of AA370 transcended even its own context. It became a modern legend, a cautionary tale, a scholarly case study, and above all, a testament to the irreducible enigma that sometimes persists even in the era of total surveillance. The personal lives of the crew through the media's lens. In the wake of Flight AA370's disappearance, the relentless gaze of the American media quickly turned from technical speculation to the human element, the pilots and crew. While aviation experts, federal authorities, and the broader public scoured for answers as to what had happened in the sky, the media descended into the details of Captain George Walker and First Officer Daniel Thompson's personal histories, everyday routines, and psychological profiles. The result was an intricate, sometimes controversial tapestry of empathy, suspicion, and the powerful hunger of a nation desperate for meaning in chaos. Decoding Captain George Walker's American Dream. From the outset, Captain George Walker was cast as the embodiment of the American pilot, a senior captain, respected and softly charismatic, with a reputation for diligence and composure. News outlets interviewed friends from his formative days in Montana, former colleagues and family members in suburbia. Media stories reconstructed his daily rituals, morning runs before shifts, the all-American breakfast, carefully tending to his 1957 Chevy in his garage. Heartfelt interviews with his spouse and adult children depicted a career man proud of his record and deeply devoted to his family. Local television aired segments showing Walker volunteering at aviation youth camps and speaking at school assemblies, a mentor figure revered by generations. Yet, as days passed with no clear explanation for AA370's fate, headlines grew more prying. Was his life as well adjusted as it seemed? National newspapers dug into public records. Was there financial distress, any brushes with the law, hidden tensions at home? A retired neighbor spoke anonymously about late-night lights in the garage, a detail that's swollen into questionable insinuations about Walker's mental state in the final weeks. The media's arc moved quickly from admiration to suspicion, and then, often, to a pleading search for confirmation that he was, after all, just like us, flawed but deeply human. First Officer Daniel Thompson, the fresh face with a secret. Daniel Thompson, youthful and on the cusp of achieving full captaincy, received symmetrically intense attention, albeit of a different flavor. Social media platforms exploded with images of Thompson grinning beside fiancée Evelyn on sunlit hikes, or arm wrestling with friends in upstate bars. Feature stories introduced his recent engagement, chronicling the heartbreak of a wedding left undone. The narrative swiftly toggled between the glossy optimism of his generation and the gnawing fear that even the most promising future could be upended. The thirst for new angles led national reporters to dissect Thompson's digital footprints. Tech journalists scrutinized his posts for signs of anxiety, melancholy, or coded cries for help. They interviewed former flight instructors and college roommates. Some op-eds questioned whether such a young pilot could withstand the enormity of responsibility or could be tempted into reckless action. Others, pointing to a clean psychological background and his involvement in aviation charities, highlighted the randomness and cruelty of fate. Every small scrap of information became public property, often divorced from context, sometimes tender, sometimes unfair. The cabin crew and the human face of loss. The flight attendants, a crew of 6 representing multiple American regions, were less individually scrutinized but collectively mythologized. Lifestyle magazines ran portraits of their travels, ambitions, and quirky habits. Human interest stories abound. A veteran purser planning her last flight before retirement, a former barista-turned-steward whose family only discovered her adventurous side from her travel blog. Airline colleagues described the routine camaraderie of layover nights and the professionalism under pressure, painting a portrait of ordinary people who stepped onto a plane for work, never to return. Individual narratives sometimes trended into broader social commentary. For a time, the media questioned work-life balance for airline employees, pay disparities, even gender roles within the profession. Unsubstantiated rumors about hidden relationships, premonitions, or conversations in airport lounges often ran parallel to more fact-based reporting, especially as online forums amplified every rumor. Public mourning, speculation, and the commodification of grief. Families of crew members became unwitting celebrities and, in some cases, victims of the media storm. Walker's family received unending calls for interviews, condolence packages, and, at times, hostile messages from conspiracy theorists. Press camping outside homes became routine. Counselors spoke publicly about the psychological harm of constant exposure, with some families hiring security to ensure privacy. Meanwhile, features exploring the interior lives of the missing often blurred the lines between honoring and consuming personal tragedy. Morning news anchors debated ethics of grief journalism as fundraisers, memorial pages, and documentaries proliferated. For much of the country, the loss of the AA370 crew became an allegory, the unknowable cost borne by those who dedicate their lives to public safety, and the epistemic limits of narrative closure when tragedy leaves so few answers, navigating rumor, stigma, and the inevitability of myth-making. With no clear culprit or cause, the media's fixation on the crew sought both explanation and catharsis. In doing so, public narratives alternately lionized, scrutinized, and mourned the missing. No stone was left unturned in the name of understanding. For months, talk shows, podcasts, and best-selling true crime writers rode the waves of new discoveries. A hospital report misfiled, a second cousin's recollections, an old war injury, any speck that might complete the picture. Yet as time passed and no explanation emerged, the tone gradually softened. Long-form essays depicted Walker and Thompson as avatars for all modern aviators, trusted, vulnerable, and heroic, even in absence. Commemorative scholarships in their names, community vigils, and memorial flights reframed the story as one of collective mourning rather than individualized suspicion. Legacy and lasting impact. Ultimately, the American media's fascination with Flight AA370's crew mirrored broader societal anxieties about responsibility, fate, and the thin line between safety and calamity. Their lives were dissected for reasons both noble and voyeuristic. In their absence, the crew became part saint, part scapegoat, part mystery, reminders of the people behind every news headline and the difficulties of ever truly knowing what happens behind the closed doors of a cockpit. Long after the search for answers faded from the front page, the personal stories of George Walker, Daniel Thompson, and their colleagues endured as testaments to both the humanity and the unknowable in aviation's greatest mysteries. Sorrow and the lingering weight of those left behind. For the hundreds of family members, friends, and loved ones of the passengers and crew of Flight AA370, the days after the plane's disappearance twisted time into an unbearable limbo. Every second became heavy, a liminal space where reality offered neither closure nor clarity, and hope flickered uncomfortably between denial and despair. In the beginning, uncertainty itself was a strange comfort. In hotel ballrooms, community churches, and makeshift crisis centers hastily set up by the airline and government agencies, each family clung to the slender thread that their loved ones were still alive somewhere, perhaps awaiting rescue or hidden on a remote stretch of land. News bulletins offered a constant churn of conflicting theories. Search maps, timelines, and flight paths decorated every available wall. Volunteers distributed snacks and blankets, while grief counselors tried to prepare families for every possibility without extinguishing hope outright. As hours bled into days, and days into weeks, a kind of stubborn determination overtook mourning. Many families refused to accept compensation settlements from the airline or government, a legal step that would have forced them to acknowledge the possibility of death. Social media became a lifeline as relatives created groups to share news reports, coordinate vigils, and champion international search efforts. Candlelit gatherings, vigils on city steps, prayer groups inside churches, and silent marches filled cities around the world with a sense of restless unity. Yet for all the outward activity, the most profound struggles happened in private. Parents sat in their children's empty bedrooms, replaying last phone calls or texts and searching for meaning in every word or delay. Spouses scrolled endlessly through photo albums, obsessed with capturing small details that might have otherwise been forgotten. Children left drawings or letters by the door, just in case dad or mom came home unannounced. The void left by ambiguity was more cutting than any certitude of loss. Without evidence of fate or location, even the rituals of mourning, funerals, memorials, final farewells, were suspended in time. Public attention magnified the pain in ways no one anticipated. News vans camped outside homes and internet forums swirled with speculation and rumor. For some, the scrutiny was a second loss. Personal grief was unraveling publicly, and random strangers judged family reactions or motives with brutal detachment. Some families chose to withdraw entirely, guarding their sorrow from cameras and journalists, while others became the impromptu spokespeople for a tragedy they never sought. Each became in some way unwilling participants in a very public narrative, one that afforded little privacy for heartbreak. Inside the depths of this ordeal, rituals emerged, customs both traditional and uniquely forged by the moment. Families left porch lights on every night, a symbolic beacon guiding loved ones home. In a small park near Chicago, a tree was planted for each missing passenger, festooned with written messages, origami cranes, and photographs. In Los Angeles, a mosaic wall gradually filled with images and prayers became a gathering place for remembrance and resilience. Some families wrote letters addressed to nowhere, sending them aloft with balloons or letting them drift down rivers, believing perhaps their words could travel where they themselves could not. Religious and cultural leaders played a vital role in helping families process the ambiguity, organizing joint prayer services, setting up crisis hotlines, and offering frameworks for hope that left space for both belief and acceptance. Some traditions allowed families to hold symbolic funerals or remembering ceremonies, mixing ancient customs with the harsh demands of modern loss. Yet even as communities united, the question, what happened, remained raw, refusing to fade into the background noise of ordinary life. With the discovery of a piece of aircraft debris months later, emotions fractured anew. For some, there was a fragile sense of closure. For others, the find only sharpened their grief, making the absence of the main wreckage and above all, any bodily remains, all the more excruciating. Debates erupted over whether to resume or suspend search efforts, whether to accept loss or keep fighting. The most intimate moments of memory, the first steps of a child, the quirks of a spouse's laugh, were now preserved only in stories and increasingly pixelated recordings. Over time, official support receded while collective memory reshaped. Survivors groups formed to provide lasting community with annual memorials and scholarships held in the names of the missing. Some family members became advocates for stronger air safety and transparent communication, determined that no other family ever endure the same agony of the unknown. Others simply disappeared from the public eye, carrying their heartbreak in silence, forever altered by the enduring ache of unanswered questions. In the years since, the vanished flight has left behind a legacy measured not in data or policy, but in the echo of longing faced by those who waited and still wait. Songs, poems, and documentaries keep their names alive, not simply as victims but as part of an unfinished story, one that forces the world to reckon with the cruel weight of uncertainty and the unbreakable thread of love that persists, even when hope itself flickers and fades. For the families of AA370, grief is not a closed chapter. It's a living presence, a testament to both the mystery that remains in the age of global surveillance and the undiminished human need for answers, reunion, and above all, remembrance. The legacy of the disappearance and major lessons learned. The disappearance of American Flight AA370 sent shockwaves far beyond the world of aviation, etching a new chapter of uncertainty into the collective memory of a technological society that once believed near-total surveillance rendered such losses impossible. As months turned to years and the case remained unsolved, the legacy of this tragic event evolved on multiple fronts, reshaping technical standards, inspiring policy debates, leaving haunting impressions on families and citizens, and ultimately changing the very way the world navigates the skies and processes unresolved tragedy. From a technical standpoint, the event exposed glaring vulnerabilities in the international framework for tracking commercial aircraft. Regulatory authorities, airlines, and manufacturers in America and globally were forced to reckon with the limits of radar coverage, the patchwork nature of satellite tracking systems, and the ease with which existing communications technology could be neutralized or circumvented. The apparent ability of a sophisticated jetliner to vanish in U.S. airspace spurred the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA, National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, and their international counterparts to modernize requirements. Continuous flight data streaming, tamper-proof black boxes with real-time satellite uplinks, multi-band redundant communications, and even the concept of international tracking corridors became top priorities. Over time, new legislation and industry protocols emerged, tightening gaps that made the AA370 disappearance possible, and reshaping the standards for global air safety. On the human and institutional side, the tragedy changed how airlines and governments respond to crises of missing aircraft. Family support mechanisms were upgraded, rapid response teams, improved psychological counseling, multilingual crisis communications, and public information officers trained for empathy over bureaucracy all became more common. The public demand for transparency forced agencies to share more data about search operations, system failures, and even classified military findings than ever before. Annual review cycles for all major flight tracking protocols became standard practice in the world's busiest aviation corridors, an ongoing symbolic gesture to the families still waiting for definitive answers. Perhaps more profound, however, were the cultural and psychological shifts the loss left behind, not just for those with loved ones on the flight, but for society as a whole. The myth of aviation infallibility took a lasting hit, replaced by a sobering sense of both awe and vulnerability in the face of vast, indifferent skies. Songs, poems, news documentaries, and works of fiction struggled to capture the deep-rooted mixture of hope, dread, anger, and resignation that the disappearance inspired. Memorials, some digital, some cast in stone, dot landscapes in the internet alike, reminders both of those lost and the persistent questions still swirling in their wake. Policy circles drew wider lessons. The crisis exposed the dangers of bureaucratic inertia, the importance of international coordination in search and rescue, and the need for real-time data sharing across borders. It also highlighted the psychological costs of ambiguity, both for families who grieve in limbo and for communities who bear the brunt of cascading conspiracy and rumor in the wake of information vacuums. Schools, training programs, and disaster management courses now teach AA370 as a cautionary tale. That technology, no matter how sophisticated, can never fully substitute for diligent human oversight, international goodwill, and the humility to accept that uncertainty is sometimes the most honest answer available. Even as technological and institutional reforms have been implemented, the case of AA370 resists closure. Its unresolved status demands a new kind of resilience, one rooted less in final answers and more in the shared pursuit of truth, innovation, and compassion. The tragedy's legacy lives on in every improved radar sweep, every protocol review, every support group commemorating a loss that has no boundaries. No measure of progress can erase the ache for closure, but perhaps the greatest lesson is that a united community, across families, nations, and generations, can, together, shine a light into even the darkest zones of modern life.